Imagine spending hundreds of millions of dollars, hiring the world's best engineers, and launching a marketing campaign that reaches every corner of the globe, only for the world to look at your product and collectively say, "No thanks." In the gaming industry, the line between a revolution and a catastrophe is razor thin. For every Nintendo Switch or PlayStation 2 that defines a generation, there is a machine that was meant to change the world, but ended up in a liquidator's warehouse within months. These aren't just bad consoles, they are the saddest sales failures in history. Machines that had potential, heart, or massive corporate backing, yet still managed to crash and burn in spectacular fashion. From the giants who fell from grace to the newcomers who never stood a chance, this is the story of the consoles that time and consumers forgot. The Apple Pippin, long before the iPhone changed the world, Apple tried to conquer the living room, and it was a disaster. In the mid-90s, Apple didn't want to build a console themselves. They wanted to license a platform. They partnered with Bondi to create the Pippin. It was essentially a stripped-down Macintosh computer inside a console shell, meant to play games and browse the web. The problem? It cost $600 in 1996. That's nearly $1,200 today. For that price, you got a machine that was slower than a dedicated PC and had a library of games that looked like educational software. It sold roughly 42,000 units worldwide before Apple pulled the plug. It remains a stark reminder that even the most valuable brand in the world can't sell a product that doesn't have a clear purpose. The Nokia N-Gage. In 2003, Nokia ruled the mobile phone world. They looked at the Game Boy Advance and thought, "We can do that, plus you can make calls." The N-Gage was born. On paper, it was the future. In reality, it was an ergonomic nightmare. To change a game, you had to take the battery out. To talk on the phone, you had to hold the device sideways against your head, a phenomenon the internet dubbed side talking. It looked like a taco and felt like a prototype. Despite Nokia's billions, they only managed to sell a fraction of their goal. It was a classic case of a company trying to solve a problem that didn't exist, resulting in a device that was a mediocre phone and a terrible game system. The Sega Dreamcast. This is perhaps the saddest failure on this list because the Dreamcast was actually good. It was the first console of the 128-bit era. It had built-in internet for online play, and its library was filled with innovative hits like Soul Calibur and Jet Set Radio. But Sega was bleeding money from their previous failures, the Saturn and the 32X. When Sony began hyping the PlayStation 2 as a supercomputer that could play DVDs, the Dreamcast's fate was sealed. Consumers waited for the PS2, and Sega, unable to sustain the mounting losses, was forced to exit the hardware business forever. It sold about 9 million units, not a tiny number, but a fatal one for a company that needed a miracle. The Nintendo Wii U, coming off the massive success of the Wii, Nintendo thought they could do it again with a tablet-based controller. But the marketing was a catastrophe. Most casual fans thought the Wii U was just a $300 accessory for the original Wii. The gamepad was bulky, had a short battery life, and could barely stay connected if you walked into the next room. While it gave us the foundations for the Switch, the Wii U itself was a ghost town. With only 13 million units sold over its entire lifespan, it is Nintendo's biggest modern failure, proving that even a loyal fan base won't buy a product if they don't understand what it is. The Atari Lynx, in 1989, the Atari Lynx was a technological marvel. It had a full-color backlit screen, 16-bit graphics, and the ability to flip the console for left-handed players. It made the original Game Boy look like a calculator, but the Lynx was huge, nearly a foot long, and it ate 6 AA batteries in less than 4 hours. More importantly, Nintendo had Tetris and a lower price point. Atari couldn't keep up with Nintendo's manufacturing or marketing. The Lynx was the superior machine in every technical way, but it died in the shadow of a little gray brick that lasted 20 hours on 4 batteries. The 3DO interactive multiplayer, the 3DO was the brainchild of EA founder Trip Hawkins. The idea was to create a high-end standard for gaming that any manufacturer could build. Panasonic, Sanyo, and Goldstar all made versions. It was powerful, it was futuristic, and it cost $700 at launch in 1993. In today's money, that's over $1,400. There were no must-have games to justify the price of a used car, and when the PlayStation arrived at $299, the 3DO became an overnight relic. It was a console built for the elite in a market that thrived on the masses. the Virtual Boy. Nintendo's biggest hardware mistake is often cited as the Virtual Boy. Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy, was pushed to release this portable VR headset before it was ready. The result was a red and black monochrome nightmare that gave players headaches and neck strain. It wasn't portable, you had to set it on a table, and it wasn't true VR. Nintendo discontinued it within a year with only 22 games ever released in North America. It sold less than 1 million units, making it a rare black mark on Nintendo's legendary history. The Philips CDI. The CDI wasn't even supposed to be a game console. It was meant to be an all-in-one multimedia appliance. But because Philips had a deal with Nintendo, they ended up with the rights to create games for the Zelda and Mario franchises. What followed were some of the worst games ever made, titles so bad they have become legendary memes. The console was expensive, the controller was a TV remote, and the games were mostly edutainment. It struggled for years before being quietly taken behind the barn, leaving behind a legacy of terrible FMV cutscenes. The Neo Geo AES. The Neo Geo was the Bentley of 90s consoles. It was literally the arcade machine in your house. No compromises. But that quality came at a staggering cost. $650 for the console and up to $200 per cartridge. In an era where SNES games were $50, the Neo Geo was an impossible dream for most kids. While it technically stayed alive for years due to a dedicated cult following, its retail presence was almost non-existent. It was a sales failure because it refused to compromise on price, effectively locking itself out of 99% of the market. The Gizmondo. The story of the Gizmondo is more about corporate crime than gaming. Launched in 2005, it was a handheld that featured GPS, a camera, and Bluetooth, years before the iPhone. But the company behind it, Tiger Telematics, was tied to the Swedish mafia. They spent millions on lavish parties and Ferrari driving executives while only selling about 25,000 units. The console crashed when the company went bankrupt amidst a massive criminal investigation. It is perhaps the only console on this list that failed because its creators were too busy being criminals to actually sell it. The Ouya. The Ouya was the darling of Kickstarter, raising $8.5 million on the promise of an open Android-based console for just $99. It was supposed to democratize game development. But when it launched, the hardware felt cheap. The controller had terrible lag and the library was mostly filled with mobile ports you could already play on your phone. The free-to-try model didn't attract big developers, and the hype evaporated almost instantly. It was a reminder that a successful crowdfunding campaign doesn't always translate to a successful retail product. The TurboGrafx 16. In Japan, the PC Engine, as it was known there, actually outsold the Famicom for a time. But when it came to America as the TurboGrafx 16, it was a total flop. NEC's marketing was bizarre, and the console only had one controller port in an era where multiplayer was becoming the standard. They also failed to secure big third-party hits, leaving the console with a library that felt too niche for the American audience. Despite having superior hardware to the NES, it was crushed between the marketing might of Nintendo and the cool factor of the Sega Genesis. The history of gaming is littered with the remains of consoles that had big dreams but even bigger flaws. Whether it was bad timing, arrogant pricing, or just plain weird design, these machines remind us that success is never guaranteed. They are the cautionary tales that every developer and manufacturer keeps in the back of their minds. They may have been failures in the boardroom, but for the few who owned them, they remain a fascinating, if somewhat sad, part of our shared history. Thanks for watching.